Hey guys, Nike here, and today I'd like to do a quick video on my thoughts to the change to the Guild Wars 2 expansion model, specifically regarding the lack of elite specs and the scope of the possible. So the change to yearly expansions with 2 follow-up content patches is, in my opinion, a net benefit. While there are certainly people that may not be happy with just 2 strikes and 1 fractal per year, it's about as good as it could be. Would I like to see another Raid Wing someday? I mean, sure, who wouldn't? But the fact is, this is the game as it exists, and as it's going to be. And there's no sense in being sad about what the game isn't. It's far healthier to accept it for what it is, or move on if you can't accept it. The lack of elite specs is, to me, a bigger potential loss. For a lot of players, especially PvPers, World v Worlders, and hardcore raiders, the elite specs were the biggest, or in fact the only selling point of the expansions. Not having elite specs is a pretty tough pill to swallow, but sort of understandable from ANET's perspective. Considering how long it takes to develop elite specs, it would probably take a full-time team working all year round only on elite specs in order to have a new set for each expansion on a yearly basis. Besides that, the idea just isn't as scalable as it looked in Heart of Thorns. We're currently sitting at 27 elite specs, and if they maintained the current model of elite specs, in 3 years from now, we would be at 54 elite specs. That's clearly a balanced nightmare and not something the studio can maintain. So what is possible? I'd like to offer some potential ideas that are within what I think the realm of possibility is for the type of quote-unquote combat features they promise each expansion to ship with. The first up would be additional core weapons. Right now, professions only get new weapons as part of expansion packs with elite specs, but each profession is missing at least 1 weapon still, and multiple if you could count offhands. So there is space to continue adding these weapons to the profession, but as core weapons rather than something that only an elite spec could use. A good example would be a staff for warrior that has a little bit of CC, but some built-in group heals and some boon access to enable a more support-oriented playstyle without having to design an entire elite spec around it. Another idea would be longbow for elementalist, which could fulfill the currently empty role of pure range DPS that sacrifices support ability, sort of similar to the way Virtuoso plays. There are some niches to build upon and fill out, and this is pretty easy design space and quite a bit less work than designing a full elite spec as well. A slightly more ambitious idea would be dual classing. Dual classing is a lower budget solution that does seem within their scope capabilities. It might look like just a simple swap for your utility skills that gives you a second bar of utilities on a cooldown, just like weapon swapping, along with some sort of stat bonus. So, for example, if you dual class warrior, maybe you get like plus 300 power and a set of heal, utility, and elite skills that fit a specific warrior flavored theme. Ranger might be 300 precision, thief might be 300 ferocity, and so on. And while it would be the same secondary skills for any profession, so a ranger warrior would get the same warrior skills as an LE warrior. Obviously, some combinations will work out better than others for different professions, but that's just how things go. Ideally, to keep power creep under control, you'd probably have to choose to dual class and give up the ability to take an elite spec, so you would have to play a 3-core trait line build in order to dual class. But you do get the big stat bonus and the utility of having a whole second set of utility skills available on swap. This wouldn't require nearly as much design work as an elite spec, since all you're doing is creating 5 new skills for each profession and assigning a stat bonus. But it would open up a ton of gameplay options, so I could see this as being something that's quite possible. An even more ambitious option would be the creation of a new profession. It would mean that people who only main one class and refuse to try anything new might be left in the cold with the expansion, but a new profession would be a big feature to add to an expansion pack, especially if it came with multiple elite specs, and it was the sort of thing that has been beyond the scope of the studio with POF and EOD, since Elite Specs took so much bandwidth and sort of fulfilled the same role. But now that the bandwidth is clear for Elite Specs and the role is open, why not have a new profession with its own Elite Specs thrown in the mix? So yeah, in my opinion, there is a lot of room left on the table to give us cool expansion of character options besides Elite Specs. But with that said, it's entirely likely they will choose something much less ambitious, like the Icebrood Saga special action key attacks or EOD Jade protocols, and this video will age incredibly poorly. But we will have to wait and see what they have in mind. So before I sign off, I'd like to leave you guys with a sort of high concept idea for an expansion pack that is in line with their vision of smaller, self-contained stories. The idea is sort of inspired by Legend of Zelda: Link to the Past. So we'd have it set on some new map somewhere iconic in Guild Wars 1 lore, but a place we haven't seen before, like the Isles of Janthier and the Mersat homeland. The story idea being that the Mersat of Guild Wars 1 era foresaw their destruction and developed a way to travel forward to, Guild Wars 2 era Tyria in order to escape their destruction. The players will have to confront them in modern-day Tyria in the ruins of the Mersat homeland, but also will gain the ability to travel back in time to the Guild Wars 1 era and fight the Mersat in the same map, but with radically different visuals, since it'll be at the full height and splendor of the Mersat civilization. So besides the story, the idea of being able to press a button and time shift when you are on the same map in order to get different events or to complete different puzzles on one map, perhaps a section of the map that you have to get to finish a puzzle is only accessible by a bridge that exists in the past but doesn't exist in the future, so to speak. So packaged with this would be the idea of the dual class specs from earlier, a nod to traveling back in time to Guild Wars 1 Tyria and learning the ways of dual professions from the adventurers of that day. The two, future patches for the X-Pack could expand perhaps even to an alternate future ahead of the Guild Wars 2 timeline, perhaps one where the Mersat win and dominate the world and the players have to prevent from ever coming to be. So there are essentially 3 similar but very different maps all in one that you can travel to with a button or a skill on your bar that lets you time shift as needed or as desired. Add in a killer feature like the reintroduction of the sky scale for a broader group of players, and you'd have an X-Pack that I can assure you anyone in the Guild Wars 2 community would be hyped for. Anyway guys, I'm just throwing out this idea. I know it has no chance of ever happening because I'm sure they have their own ideas, but I threw it out there because I know a lot of people were a bit down in the dumps about the announcement of smaller X-Packs and the lack of Elite Specs. And I wanted to demonstrate that smaller scope doesn't mean the ideas have to be less cool or the mechanics any less fun. So I thought I would come up with an idea for something smaller in scope, but way cool in terms of concept and fun potential. So anyway guys, thanks for watching. Please leave any comments you have down below. I'd like to hear what you have to say, and I'll see you next time.